Many teens struggle with regulating their impulses and making healthy choices. For example, drug use, unproductive or addictive behaviours, poor friend choices, etc. Should parents hold fast to the rules and consequences they have set, or stand back and let teens make their own choices and mistakes? The question is interesting because it's coming in part from what we often hear from this philosophy and what we often hear from the Swami, which is that parents go too far into do's and don'ts, too far into telling their children what to do. And it's counterproductive to everything that the parent is actually trying to achieve. There is this parental attachment and possessiveness. I'm attached to you, and so my emotions are dependent on you being a particular way, having certain thoughts, attitudes and behaviours, certain successes and joys. So there's that attachment dependency, and the possessiveness of the relationship often also opens up, or can open up, this thought, if you like, that, well, because you're my child, I can say to you whatever I want to say and give you the advice I want to give and so forth, whenever I want to give it. And so generally speaking, we don't treat other people that way. When it comes to our friends or our siblings or our parents or our colleagues and co-workers, we allow them a little distance. But where we have attachment and possessiveness in relationships, we feel completely free to, quote unquote, speak our mind. Now, speaking our mind is not a bad thing, but the problem is that the way that we do it often comes across as pushing ourselves onto others, giving them unrequested advice or do's and don'ts without their consent. So when it comes to the question itself, let's sort of start to ask, what is it the questioner is needing here? What's the questioner's needs? Broadly speaking, when we talk about any kind of question of this sort, what we're looking to do is to eliminate our confusion and agitation. I'm not sure what to do, and I'm agitated by my current environment. So that's generally speaking what we want. We want to remove our sense of I don't know, that confusion as to what choice to make, and the frustration and agitation that the circumstance may be causing me to experience. We want to make correct parenting choices. So the problem with mental agitation is that while we are agitated, it becomes more difficult for us to see the correct path, to see the correct choice. And so this is really what we want to do. We want to develop the capacity to see clearly. So the trigger in the external world for that is essentially the child's behaviour, the ideas, the attitudes or behaviours that you as a parent believe needs correction. And the you believe is an important part. We come to a circumstance or a relationship, and let's stay with the context here of parent-child, with I know what's right. The first thing that we should be doing if we want to be making the right choices and serving those whom we love is to recognize I could be wrong. The moment we come to a scenario knowing something, then the shutters are closed and we've got no way of developing more insight. What we think was right could have been wrong, and vice versa. Okay, I've got my opinions and my beliefs and so forth, but with more information, with deeper thinking, perhaps they will be turned on their head. But nonetheless, we do have to start somewhere. So identify the attitude, idea or behaviour that you believe needs correction. And there's some very simple examples here. Child doesn't do their homework, speaks rudely to their parents, wastes their time gaming during the day, and so on and so forth. So the first poem in the book, Select English Poems, is The Turkey and the Ant. And we come back to this poem over and again. The theme of that poem is encompassed in the last few lines. So the ant is speaking to the turkey and says, ere you remark another's sin, bid thine own conscience look within. It serves as a really useful tool for us to reframe the circumstance that we are dealing with. So as a mental exercise, or as a sort of philosophical exercise, whatever it is that you see in the other person, whatever it is you see in the child that they are doing or not doing that needs correction, make the presumption that the same issue lies within you right now and that you are demonstrating it. You can draw on the philosophical principle, your mind projects your world. When you look around you, what are you seeing? You are seeing your own self reflected everywhere. When you enter the dream state, what are you seeing? I'm seeing mountains and trees and airports, and I've lost my passport and all these things I'm seeing. When you wake up, you realize that that whole thing that I saw, all just fibers and fibers of my own mind. It was my own mind that was arguing with me in the airport. It was my own mind that was showing care and compassion, etc. So when you see something in others that needs correction, presume, make the assumption, just for the sake of argument, that that is my own mind projecting outwards in that person. So go inwards and look for it. And it does require a little bit of imagination. Let's take the first one. Child doesn't do their homework. I've been in my career for 10 years. I don't have homework. Okay, so broaden what you mean by homework. What is homework for you as a parent? What would homework be for anyone in general? So use it as a metaphor, use it as a philosophical concept, and then look for those areas where, okay, I'm not doing my homework. She speaks rudely to her parents. Where do I speak to others without having that thought, that care of how am I being received? What's the effect when these thoughts land? We have an obligation, if we want others to listen to us, to maintain their receptivity. Where do I not do that? And we will for sure be able to find it. He wastes his time gaming all day. Okay, so I have resources, thoughts, emotions, actions, money, time. I have a whole host of freedoms that I take for granted. Am I using them to my best advantage? Am I doing what I ought to do, or am I sort of squandering my resources a little bit? This is the first step, is to identify very clearly the things that you think need correction, and then turn the attention within and develop a conviction and an actual plan to address those. So the reason for doing this is, first of all, to model the behavior itself. So there's a quote that the Swami often brings up from the Bhagavad-Gita in chapter 3. It says, "Whatsoever the superior person does, that alone other people do. Whatever standard he sets, that the world follows." So he's speaking to Arjuna here and saying, well, look, if you don't perform your obligations, if you don't perform your duty, then others will also welch on theirs. Because you are a leader in this community. Arjuna is the leader of the Pandava army. In your family, you are a leader. In your circle of friends, you will find those who are the thought leaders, the culture leaders. In our society, in politics, in music, in art. And whatever they do, that we allow ourselves to live up to that standard. And so if you are in a position of power, influence, visibility, you have a higher obligation to live according to your own higher values. So this is the first thing, you're modeling the behavior. And those who are naturally inclined to follow you will do so. And even if you think, I have a rebellious teenager, they're never going to do what I do. Rebellion is a response to being pushed. Why do we rebel? In fact, we use this phrase, we rebel against. What we rebel against is when the mind is told to do something, or when the mind is told it must not do something. The desire for anything increases with prohibition. So even if you think, my teenager is completely disconnected and they're not going to follow what I do, you are modeling the behavior. And then the child's own attachment to you as a parent will start to function. You may not think that your parent, that your spouse or your child or your parent is attached to you. They are, because they are your parent, child, or spouse. It's inevitable, is what I'm saying, that with the exception of rare individuals who genuinely are fully objective, people will be attached to you who are close to you, even if that behaviour doesn't seem to be what we would normally call attachment. Oh, my wife is not attached to me, she's constantly mean to me. Okay, that doesn't mean anything. In fact, the fact that she's mean to you indicates the attachment, because she's not mean to anybody else. So what's special about your relationship? It's the attachment, it's the possessiveness, etc. So the child's own natural attachment will then start to function. They may not even really be aware that it's happening, but the way that you conduct your life and demonstrate it will start to have an influence. So this is the first thing. You're modeling the sort of behavior that you want the household to encompass. The second thing, and this is a little bit burying the lead here, is that it generates empathy and mental peace within you as a parent. So the problem with knowing how to serve someone generally lies in knowing what they need. This is the purpose of empathy, is to be able to feel that other person's experience, to understand it, and to have the intention to serve their growth. The opposite of empathy is attachment. How is this the case? What's our definition of attachment? Love plus selfishness. So that love part is the connection. The selfishness part functions to get what I want. We cannot hold that attitude of trying to get what I want and at the same time the attitude of it doesn't matter what I want, what does the person need? And so if my attachment is functioning, my empathy is to that degree degraded. I may feel things, I will receive information just by interacting with that person, but the attachment will distort it. So empathy is lost. By modeling the behavior that you want to see, you'll start to feel those moments where perhaps you don't want to model it. I do have a lot of homework, as it were, to do. Something from my job, or something that I promised my sister, or something that etc. I do have homework. I don't really want to do it, but I will do it. And now when it comes to dealing with your child, you have a lived experience that is a lot more relatable and clear to you, close to you, that you can speak from. So you're generating some empathy, and you're also developing your own mental peace. Why? Because you are living up to your own higher values. You are doing what you know ought to be done. Because what we're saying about the child's behavior is that it does not conform to what is aligned to their growth and their well-being. If we are doing things that are not aligned to our growth and well-being, we're going against our own conscience and conviction. We use that idea of the conscience being the voice of the subtle intellect. That still small voice that calls within us to do good to ourselves. If I don't live up to my obligations, if I'm not caring about others, if I'm not seeking truth, I'm not doing good to myself, that will generate mental agitation. Anytime we function apart from conscience and conviction, we will be mentally agitated. And so the more we align our thoughts, feelings and actions to what we know is correct, our own sense of mental agitation will drop, will become more peaceful. It is in that peaceful mind that clarity arises. The obligation to hew more closely to your own higher values increases when we are a parent, for the simple reason that we are influencing others in a very direct way now. So that mental peace that we are generating within ourselves is necessary for making the right choice. We often use that very simple example. You're going in for surgery. The surgeon comes into the operating area disheveled and upset. You do not want him operating on you because you know a mental agitation will stop him from being able to think clearly, to think under pressure. If you're a surgeon, you have to be able to think on your feet, under pressure, handle that, to know what to do next. So too as a parent. You're doing things that require care, attention, dexterity. If I'm mentally agitated, I won't know what to do in the moment. The skill and art of living, the Swami talks about. So the skill aspect is because it's something that can be learned and practiced. There are principles, there are tools, there are practices you can put in place to live properly. But it's also an art. You can do A or B. Yes, but which one should I do right now? Because in some circumstances, A is the correct option. And in some circumstances, B is the correct option. There's no book that can tell you right now what to do. That's your own intuitive sense, your own thinking. You're standing in front of a blank canvas. Who are you going to ask? What colour should the background be? There's no book to consult. There's no person to consult. There's only you. Only you know what colour needs to go onto that canvas first. There's a creativeness. There's an artistry informed by your knowledge of the painting process. So there needs to be that empathy with the other and the mental peace within yourself before we can start to make correct choices. So it means, first of all, checking your own life. And this is not an exhaustive list, but it's a good indicator. What sort of self-regulation do I have in place? That ability in us to recognize our needs from our wants and to know where that line is, to give yourself what you need, but to recognize that the moment we go beyond what we need, we're getting into ego now. Self-regulation is simply saying no thank you to what your own intellect knows you don't need. Assess that. When we practice self-regulation, the effect is more energy and greater mental peace. The effect of self-regulation is lightness. Gratitude and humility. Do I have this implemented in my life? Not how grateful and humble am I. That's irrelevant. What am I doing to make sure that I am sustaining my gratitude, to enhance my humility? Do I have a practice? My obligations. Am I moment to moment, day to day performing my obligations? What is my emotional profile like? Do I have a sense of care and compassion? And again, am I actively trying to promote that within myself? And of course, finally, am I seeking truth? Do I really want to know the truth? Do I really want liberation? Am I seeking it? And if so, how? So the first aspect of relating to others is to check one's own life first. Find that trigger in the external world that is giving the reaction of agitation, confusion, frustration, etc. Look for it within yourself. Presume it is there, and use metaphor and poetry and symbolism if you need to. Obviously things like homework relate in a very different way, but find it and start to clear it out. This is the first aspect of this. So the question that we are looking to address is, as a parent, should I hold to the rules that I have or step back and let teens make their own mistakes? Should I do A or B? Don't get sucked in by that question. The first thing you should ask is, why not both? Why not neither? Why not something else? So both of these are means of serving the child's growth. And the moment you invite that experience of parenthood, you have become a servant. You have made yourself a servant to that child and their well-being. You ask for something, you get it. And when you get it, you don't just get the joy of that experience, you get all of the obligations that come with it. So you turn yourself into a servant. And it's through service that we become masters. So the question is asking, when do I use which method? Or which method should I use? Having rules and consequences and do's and don'ts? Or stepping back and letting them make their own mistakes? So another way that we can look at this is to say always employ both. Okay, what do we mean by this? When we say let others make mistakes, we're saying let them be free to err, to make the mistakes. So the let here is redundant. There's nothing you can do to give another person the freedom to act. They already are free. You can't let another person choose. That's what they are doing. That's the, if you like, the definition of a human being. A conscious creature who has the freedom to choose its actions. That's a human being. Animal is a conscious creature which lacks the freedom to choose its actions. So when we talk about letting others make their own mistakes, we're talking about an attitude within us of relinquishing that involvement, attachment, and possessiveness. Do this, don't do that. I don't want to see you make this choice. I do want to see you make this choice. That's the idea of letting others make their own mistakes, is to relinquish the internal demand and expectation that the other person act in a particular way. How do you get that? That we just discussed. All of the self-discipline and all of the self-development practices are giving us more and more that capacity of detachment. Knowledge. Human beings are free. My 14-year-old son is free to make terrible choices. My brother, who's addicted to gambling, is free to go to the casino. I am free to cheat on my wife. Now, these actions may run counter to the individual's well-being, but that does not violate the freedom that we have to do it. So recognizing the inherent freedom is the first thing. That's something that you cannot change. Because when we are involved and attached in a relationship, when there is possessiveness, we often forget that and we try to coerce. So essentially what we're doing when we try to coerce is forgetting or negating or denying the other person's inherent freedom. Start with that and recognize the limitations of your authority and influence. So it's knowledge. Human beings are free. And it's also an attitude. It's an attitude of ahimsa, is the phrase that's used in Sanskrit. It means non-violence. So the attitude is of non-coercion, because you know the person's free anyway. I can't go against nature, and each person is constrained by their own nature anyway. There's another verse in Gita, and he actually uses that phrase, what can restraint do? Every single one of us acts helplessly according to our own vasanas. The one with gambling vasanas will express them in one form or another. The one with drinking vasanas, the one with service vasanas, philosophy vasanas. Whatever your vasanas are, there's nothing you or anyone else can do. They will helplessly express. And that person is free to choose. And I can't take away that freedom. The moment we start to really integrate these, something shifts within us. That attachment, that tension starts to dissolve. Empathy arises, insight is available to us, and now we can see what ought to be done. So letting others make their own mistakes is something that we should always be employing, in the sense that we recognize their inherent freedom, and we recognize that that person's own vastness, coming from who knows where, will helplessly express. And at the same time, you must hold to rules. Your own intellect as a parent, as a human, understands cause-effect relationships. You understand the sort of home that you want to embody. So you will have your own set of ideas, convictions, and so forth. They must also be adhered to. The question is, how will you sustain or maintain those? This is where letting others make their own mistakes comes in first. Knowing which rules to hold to, bend or change, knowing the degree to which they should be adhered to, knowing how to deploy them, that only comes when there is that relative mental peace. So we're not saying that letting others make their own mistakes means that you let them get away with any sorts of behavior. So let's say you have a son who has severe developmental issues, and as you say, is a bully physically. Well, that's the boy's nature. I must let him express himself. Or he speaks abusively to his sister. Well, that's the boy's nature. No. It does not mean that you allow behavior, and we'll get into this, but you brought it up now, so I'll touch on it. It does not mean that you allow the behavior. What we're talking about here is recognizing the truth. That's all. Which is that the boy is free because he's a human being. He has freedom to choose his actions, and at the same time he's constrained by his own nature. That gives us a little mental space, rather than, that attitude of what's wrong with you? This is not how you behave. This is how you behave. That tension-filled, one way, I'm going to tell you what to do and I'm going to coerce you into doing it. That's what needs to go. So if you have someone whose behavior is destructive, you must interrupt it. I heard someone say this once. I'm not saying I fully agree with it, but it's got some truth to it. Training children, training dogs, and training spouses. You interrupt destructive behavior, ignore bad behavior, and praise good behavior. Now, I'm actually against praise, so perhaps you might say promote good behavior. When there is behavior that is destructive, you can't let it continue. And so this is sort of what we're touching on now. You have to decide as a parent what sort of home, what sort of environment, what sort of world you want to create. You're not just creating a home that lies within the boundary of your property. There's that quote, let the home be the center and not the boundary of your affection. You are creating an entire world with the sort of, let's say, rules and disciplines, expectations, if you want to use that word in a slightly different sense, within your home. You may not think of it that way, but this is a good way to think about it. This is the world that I'm creating. This is the nucleus, my home, the boundary of my 900 square feet. That's the nucleus, but everything that I'm creating here is expanding outwards into the world. I'm creating this world. Everything's an expression of my mind. Again, use that idea as a way of helping to reframe it. So you have to be clear on the sort of behaviors and attitudes that are appropriate and inappropriate. Go anywhere in the world and you will find this. Go to Middle East and you'll find a clear set of guidelines as to what appropriate dress is. Come to Venice Beach California, and you'll have a very different set of guidelines, but both have guidelines. And if you step outside them, there are consequences. So this is where you serve the child's interests. They must learn cause and effect. Do I hold to rules or let them make their own mistakes? Rules means cause-effect, action and consequence. Hold to those rules, otherwise they won't respect you. If you are rigid, similarly no respect. You have to be flexible enough to know when the rule is to be held. Okay, in these circumstances things are a little different, so we can bend a little bit. Or, you know what, things are now changed. I see, when you were 12 years old, that was the case. Now you're 14, we can change that rule. I've seen you demonstrate some responsibility. That rule needs to go, etc. So you have to have that humility to review, to change. But while the rule is there, it must be used as that guideline. And so the question of whether or not you implement the rules only arises if there needs to be a discussion according to differences in circumstance. But the rule is the rule for a reason. Rules are not made to be broken. Rules are made to be followed. And when they're not followed, there are consequences. You may be made to break rules. That might be your swadharma. That's a different thing. But a rule is not made to be broken. A rule is there to serve the health and well-being of individuals. That's what rules are for. And if the rules that you've set in your home aren't doing that, it's the wrong rule. So this is another aspect. Any rules and consequences that are in place in the home, you must be ready to justify that based on your own core values. Why is it that I'm not allowed to speak rudely to my sister? What's wrong with doing that? Can't I express who I really am? Can't I allow myself to express my frustration? Why do I have to filter myself, restrain myself? Freedom of speech, etc. Okay, now if you are going to say, no, you can't speak that way to your sister in this house, you have to justify it based on a set of core values that come back to individual growth and well-being. Keep the rules. But while the rules are being implemented, maintain that sense of compassion, maintain that sense of being unaffected. Now, he broke the rule again. These are the consequences. Think about it from the perspective of judge and jury in the judicial system. We don't want our jury and our judge to be upset, to be angry, to be agitated when they are doing their job. We want that dispassion and compassion. Here is someone else who has broken one of society's rules. Okay, what do we do? Oh, clearly guilty. That person needs to go into incarceration for 3 years. We do that. We implement that cause and effect dispassionately without any sense of anger, conflict. We don't want the judge to be angry when she is handing down the verdict or the punishment. In the same way, when we are implementing those rules, we want to be calm. So another aspect of maintaining the rules and the discipline is to let the rule making itself be collaborative. Include as many people as you can that are in the household. Now, for very young children, this is obviously a different story. But when it comes to teenagers, if you can engage them collaboratively, then it's not you handing down rules to them. It is everybody figuring out what kind of world we want to create. Now, depending upon the level of vision of the individuals involved, you might, when you actually speak it, you might say, what kind of house do we want to create? But in your own mind, and in fact, to the kids, you should actually be thinking about this, what kind of world are we as a family creating? So what sort of guidelines should we have? What sort of rules should we have? And what should the consequences be? And let everybody speak in that regard, because everyone's got their own thoughts and feelings of what they want. And try to arrive at a collaborative set of guidelines where there is buy-in. Rebellion happens when you dictate from the top down. So there is a collaborative approach that can be taken if the child has enough intellectual maturity. And of course that's very much age dependent. Once the child agrees, then it's going to be much easier to remind them of what they signed up for. That's much easier than saying, I'm the parent and I'm in charge and you have to do what I say. But when there is a collaborative approach in terms of generating a set of guidelines, then it's going to be much easier to remind them. So just a final point on the rulemaking. Yes, collaborative is the best, but don't forget who's in charge. You are the parent, and ultimately it is your decision how things function. And when the child is 18, then they will be in charge of how things function in their life. But until that point, don't fall into that trap of catering to the child's emotions. The tail must not wag the dog. So that's the first aspect. The first aspect is dealing with what is currently present, the behavior that you want corrected. Next thing to do is to create a conducive environment for what you do want. Right? The beatings will continue until morale improves. Right? Isn't going to work, not a conducive environment. So what are the attitudes and behaviors you want your child to express? Okay, so we've already spoken about modeling them. But understanding your child's nature, what they are like, that gives you some insight into the type of environment that will naturally give rise to those. Think of the soil, seed, fruit analogy. What do you want? I want mangoes. Okay, do you have a mango seed? Yes, in fact, I do have a mango seed. So what do you need? Soil. What do you want? I want my child to show care and compassion. That's the fruit. Is there a seed for that? Well, yes, he's a human being. So he has that in his nature already. It's just there waiting. What's the soil that I can provide to elicit it? And we've already spoken about modeling it first. But there will be other things that you can provide in the environment, exposure to experiences, conversations, individuals, groups, activities, etc., that will also provide a conducive environment for that child's seeds to begin to sprout. So this is the second aspect, is that we're looking to create conducive environments for good behavior rather than trying to directly elicit the good behavior. Similarly, can provide conducive environments, or put another way, provide environments that are non-conducive for bad behavior. Rather than trying to wrestle with bad behavior and tamp it down, hands off. Just create an environment where that's no longer conducive. Great example of this. Many people I've spoken to come to the academy and they've said, you know, the whole time I've been here, I haven't even thought about meat or alcohol. Normally, every day I'm eating meat, having a couple of drinks. To be honest, I was a little worried that I was going to come to this ashram and no booze and no meat. I haven't even thought about it. Why not? The environment is not conducive. And in the same way, understand your child's nature in terms of the positive desires and aspirations that they have. The things that are natural and healthy for them. All teenagers would want to be accepted by their peers, depending upon their age, want to be seen as an object of romantic attraction. We all want a boyfriend or a girlfriend at a certain age. These are normal, healthy aspects. Entice them. Use what you know their desires are. So if the child is, say, not getting enough physical exercise, not eating healthy, making those sorts of choices. You can exploit their desire to be seen as someone who is quote unquote attractive as a way of enticing them towards healthier behavior. Now, this is of course a little tightrope, because you do it wrongly and what are you going to get into? Generating a sense of shame or generating a sense of oppression. So what you're looking to do is to create an environment where they naturally themselves want to express that behavior. And the difficulty here is having the clarity and flexibility to know what that is for each individual child. Because each child has their own nature. So not everybody will respond to the same environment in the same way. But this is the general rule. And this is the thinking that needs to go on. And there's a lot of analysis that needs to go on here. But like we said, you've invited the child into your home, this is the time you have to spend. You've got nothing better to do anyway. Final aspect is surrender. Ultimately, you can't make anything happen. All you can do is put causes in and then see what happens. There's nothing you can do to make that hammer strike the nail perfectly. You can put certain causes in, but what the result looks like is not up to you. Or golf is another example. Yeah, you can swing the club and hit the ball, who knows where it will land. A sudden gust of wind knocks it 3 feet off course. So it's understanding what you ought to do based upon what we've discussed already. And then putting it in place as best you can, and then say, right, that's all I can do. So we do our obligations and don't force beyond it. And coming back to your earlier question, this is why the Swami says just shut up and leave them alone. Because the tendency when we are possessed and attached is that we will go well beyond our obligation. So the child is doing something which is perhaps not quite right. Your obligation is to ask the question, why do you do that? That doesn't seem like it would serve your best interests. And then whatever they say, whatever crazy justification they give, accept it, okay? You've planted the seed of asking that question. That's all you needed to do. Just ask the question that you want them to ask themselves. Pretend you are their intellect, speaking to their mind. Ask the question, step back. But we tend to hound and push too much, and it has the opposite effect. They switch off. So this is encompassed in the poem The Olive Tree. One hermit planted a sapling, prayed for rain, prayed for sunshine, prayed for frost, and the tree died. He went well beyond what he ought to have done. The other hermit just planted it, did everything he needed to do, planted it, protected it with some rocks perhaps, sat back, and then let nature take its course. So this is the first aspect of surrender. Second is to understand that every person is on their own karmic path. So don't worry too much about the metaphysics of this. It simply means that every person has their own nature and must go through their own experiences. Nature always helps. It never harms. Nature always moves us in the direction of health and healing. Don't presume to know better than nature what's going on or what ought to be done. This is the message of the olive tree. Understand your obligations, perform those, and then let everything else fall where it may. This person is my son. How can I say that? How can I just let it happen? Surely I must. I got to do more to... No. Don't do more. Less is more. And the last aspect of surrender is to have faith in your own goodness. If you are asking these questions, how do I best serve my child's interests? How do I model good behavior? What do I do, etc.? This is coming from an impulse, a desire to see happiness and joy and growth in another human being. This is a beautiful quality. Recognize those beautiful qualities that you do have the understanding of life that you are trying to increase, the compassion that you are trying to model. And have faith that the values that you have been exhibiting in your life will have their effect. Whatsoever a good person does, that others will follow. You are a leader. Start living that good life and have faith that others will naturally follow that path to the degree to which they can. We're doing more good than we realize, perhaps. Have faith in that idea, that I do have good values, I do have good thoughts. I can't change another person's nature. They're on their own path. I'll simply do what I ought to do and leave the rest up to nature. So a lot of this is attitude. A lot of this is knowledge. When it comes to how to implement it in practice, there's no hard and fast rules because every situation is different. And so this is why the emphasis is on understanding the principles and integrating them into your own personality first, and then you will start to naturally see how to deploy those same principles and ideas with that specific child and his sister who is 2 years younger than him in a completely different way. Same principle, same idea you're trying to create, but done in vastly different ways because they are different.